It was one of those early mornings when the sky was still half asleep, soft shades of gray blending with orange light. Officer Daniel Harris sat in his car outside the station, sipping his coffee and staring at the steam rising from the cup. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of moment he loved before the chaos of the day began. He'd been a police officer for 15 years, and though the job had changed him in many ways, he still believed in one thing: doing the right thing. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who bragged. His co-workers respected him, his neighbors trusted him, and people in the town often called him the good cop. He had a calm way of talking to people, even those who were angry or scared. Over the years, he'd helped find lost kids, stopped fights before they got worse, and made sure people felt safe. But beneath that calm exterior, Daniel was tired. The job had taken a toll. He missed too many birthdays, too many dinners. His wife, Emily, had grown distant. Their marriage felt more like an obligation than love. The only thing that still gave him strength was his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was his light, the reason he smiled when he got home, even after a long shift. Every night before bed, she'd run into his arms, giggling as he lifted her up. They had a ritual. She'd hand him her small drawing book, filled with stick figures of her and him in uniform, holding hands. "You're my hero, Daddy," she'd say. And Daniel would smile, kiss her forehead, and whisper, "You're mine too, sweetheart." That morning, Daniel didn't know that everything was about to change. When he entered the precinct, something felt off. People weren't looking at him the same way. There were whispers, short glances that quickly turned away. He brushed it off and went to his desk. A few minutes later, Captain Reed walked in, holding a file in his hand and a serious expression on his face. "Daniel, can I see you in my office?" the captain said, his tone flat. Inside the office, Daniel sat across from his boss, confusion written all over his face. The captain placed a folder on the table and slowly opened it. Inside were photographs, reports, and a small bag of evidence, cash and sealed packets. "Daniel," the captain began, "we've got a serious situation. Evidence went missing from the drug case you handled last week. Security footage shows you were the last one in the evidence room, and..." He paused, sliding a piece of paper toward Daniel. "We found this in your locker." Daniel stared at the bag in disbelief. "That's not mine," he said quickly. "I didn't take anything." "You know me, Captain. I would never." Reed raised a hand, stopping him. "Calm down. We'll figure it out, but until then, I have to place you on administrative leave." The words hit Daniel like a brick. He felt his stomach twist. "Administrative leave? For what? For doing my job?" "I'm sorry," Reed said quietly, "but this comes from higher up. Internal Affairs will contact you. You should get a lawyer." Daniel's throat tightened. He stood up, gripping the edge of the desk. "Captain, please. You know my record. 15 years, not a single complaint. Someone's setting me up. You've got to believe me." Reed looked away. "I do, but this is out of my hands." Daniel walked out of the office, his hands shaking. His co-workers stared, whispering among themselves. One of them, Officer Turner, gave him a sympathetic look but said nothing. That silence hurt more than any word could. By the afternoon, the story had already spread across the department. Officer Harris accused of evidence theft. His phone buzzed with messages from people asking if it was true. His wife called him that night, her voice cold and uncertain. "What's going on, Daniel?" she asked. "People are saying you stole something from work." "I didn't," he said, pacing across the living room. "Someone planted it. They're framing me." There was a long silence. Then she said softly, "I don't know what to believe anymore." That line cut deep. He had always been honest with her, even when things were hard. But now it felt like the world had turned its back on him. The next morning, 2 officers showed up at his house with a search warrant. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as they went through his things. One of them, a woman who always waved at him when he came home, turned away when their eyes met. They found nothing, but the damage was done. Daniel was taken to the station, booked, fingerprinted, and photographed like a criminal. Cameras flashed outside as reporters shouted questions. "Officer Harris, did you steal from the evidence room? Do you have anything to say to the department?" He said nothing. His mind was numb. In the holding cell, Daniel sat on the bench staring at the floor. Everything he had worked for, his badge, his reputation, his life, was slipping away. He thought of Lily. How would he explain this to her? How would she understand? That evening, his lawyer came to see him. A young man, nervous but kind. "Daniel, they're charging you with evidence tampering and theft. It looks bad, but if we can prove the footage was altered, we might have a chance." Daniel nodded slowly. "I just want to go home. I need to see my daughter." "Not yet," the lawyer said softly. "We have to wait for bail hearing." Days passed. Inside the small cell, time moved slowly. The sounds of doors slamming and keys jangling became part of his routine. He barely ate, barely slept. The only thing that kept him going was the thought of Lily's face, her laughter, her drawings, her voice calling him daddy. Then one morning, he was taken to court for his first hearing. The room was filled with reporters and strangers. But in the crowd, his eyes found her. Lily, sitting beside her mother, clutching her teddy bear tightly. For a moment, the noise disappeared. The world faded, and all he saw was his little girl. Her eyes were wide, filled with confusion and fear. Daniel's heart broke. He wanted to run to her to tell her everything would be okay, but all he could do was stand there in handcuffs. When the judge called for recess, the officers led him toward the exit. He turned his head, hoping for one last look. That's when he saw Lily's tears fall as she whispered something to her mother. "Please," Daniel said suddenly, turning to the officers beside him. "Let me hug my daughter. Just once, please." One officer shook his head. "We can't, not here. Please," Daniel begged again, his voice cracking. "She's just a kid. Let me hold her." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked up. There was something in Daniel's voice and a raw pain that no one could ignore. The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick," he said. Daniel dropped to his knees as Lily ran to him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as tightly as he could. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You believe me, don't you?" Lily nodded, her small arms around his neck. "I believe you, Daddy." It lasted only a few seconds before the officers gently pulled them apart. But that hug, that small moment, would stay with Daniel forever. It was both the most painful and the most beautiful moment of his life. As he was led away, he looked back one last time. Lily waved, tears on her cheeks, holding the teddy bear close to her heart. That night in his cell, Daniel sat on the cold floor and stared at the wall. He could still feel her tiny arms around him, hear her voice echoing in his mind. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know how he'd prove his innocence or who had set him up. But one thing he knew for sure, he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. Because somewhere out there, his daughter still believed in him, and that was enough to keep him fighting. Days in the county jail passed like slow-moving shadows. The walls were gray, the air heavy, and time felt stuck. Daniel Harris had been there for almost 2 weeks now. Every day looked the same. Cold mornings, long hours, and quiet nights filled with thoughts that refused to stop. He tried to stay strong, but it wasn't easy. The hardest part wasn't the cell, or the food, or even the whispers from other inmates who recognized him as the cop. The hardest part was the silence that followed him everywhere. He missed the sound of his daughter's laughter, the tiny footsteps running toward him after work. He missed being a father, a man with purpose. Every night he lay on the small bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the folder on the captain's desk, the planted evidence, the shock on everyone's faces. He didn't know who did it or why, but he knew one thing: someone wanted him out. His lawyer, Adam, visited him every few days. "I'm still digging," Adam would say, sitting across from him in the visiting room. "The footage that shows you entering the evidence room, it looks real, but there are cuts. I think someone edited it." Daniel leaned forward. "Can you prove that?" "I'm trying," Adam said. "But we need someone inside the department to talk. Someone who knows what's going on." Daniel nodded. It wasn't much, but it was hope. At night, Daniel began writing letters to Lily. He didn't know if she'd ever read them, but it helped him survive the days. He wrote about the stars they used to watch from the backyard, about her drawings, about how proud he was of her. Every letter ended the same way: "I'll come back to you. I promise." One morning, the guard came by with a small envelope. "Mail for Harris." Daniel's heart jumped as he took it. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a small piece of paper written in a child's handwriting. "I miss you, Daddy. I know you didn't do it. I love you." He pressed the note to his chest and closed his eyes. It was from Lily. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. The next court hearing came a few days later. Daniel was brought in handcuffed, his orange jumpsuit wrinkled, his face tired but determined. Reporters were waiting outside again, calling his name, throwing questions at him. He ignored them. He only wanted to see one face in that crowd. Inside, he spotted Lily sitting beside her mother again. This time she smiled when she saw him. It was small, but it was enough. Her mother didn't say anything, but she didn't pull Lily away either. That was progress. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The hearing was short, mostly procedural, but the lawyer managed to convince the judge to set a bail. It was high, too high, but at least there was a chance. That evening, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed in the cell, thinking about how to raise the money. He had some savings, but not enough. His house was under mortgage, and his wife wasn't answering his calls. For the first time, he felt helpless. A few days later, something unexpected happened. One of his old co-workers, Officer Turner, came to see him. Turner looked uncomfortable sitting across the glass divider. "I shouldn't be here," he said softly. "But I had to tell you something." Daniel leaned forward. "What is it?" "There's talk in the department," Turner continued. "They think the missing evidence wasn't stolen. It was moved. And someone higher up doesn't want people asking questions." "You were an easy target. Who?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. Turner hesitated. "I can't say names. But you worked the Rivera case, right? The drug dealer's arrest last month?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "I was the arresting officer." Turner nodded. "That's the one. That case made someone look bad. They needed a scapegoat, and you were right in the middle." Daniel felt anger rise in his chest. "So they ruined my life to save theirs?" Turner lowered his voice. "Be careful. The person behind this isn't just some officer. He's connected." He paused, glancing toward the guard. "I'll see what I can do, but you didn't hear this from me." Before Daniel could say more, Turner stood and left. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling again, but this time his thoughts were different. He wasn't just hurt, he was determined. Whoever had done this wasn't going to get away with it. The next morning, his lawyer returned with a small smile. "Good news. Someone paid your bail." Daniel blinked. "Who?" "An anonymous donor," Adam said. "They didn't leave a name, but they left a note that said, 'Keep fighting.' The truth is closer than you think." Daniel was stunned. He didn't know who would do that, but he was grateful. A few hours later, he walked out of the jail for the first time in weeks. The sunlight felt strange on his skin. The air smelled like freedom and fear all at once. Cameras flashed again as reporters shouted questions, but he kept walking, his eyes fixed on the distance. That night, he stayed at a friend's old apartment. It was small and quiet, but it gave him space to think. He went through the case file his lawyer had given him, studying every detail. There were things that didn't add up, missing timestamps, camera footage that cut off at the wrong moment, and reports signed by people he didn't remember working with. The next day, Adam introduced him to someone, a young journalist named Maya Thompson. She was sharp, curious, and brave enough to dig into stories others avoided. "I've been following your case," she said when they met. "Something doesn't feel right." "You were framed, weren't you?" Daniel nodded. "That's what I believe." "I want to help," she said. "But I'll need access, now files, contacts, anything you can remember." He hesitated. "Why would you risk your job for me?" Maya smiled slightly. "Because people like you deserve someone to tell their story right." They began working together quietly. She started digging through old security logs and police documents. Daniel gave her names of people who had access to the evidence room. They discovered that the footage showing him entering was real, but the timestamp had been altered. The video wasn't from that night at all. "This could change everything," Maya said one evening, sitting across from him in a cafe. "If we can prove it's been tampered with, we can clear your name." Daniel nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. "Do it," he said. "Whatever it takes." In the days that followed, Maya worked late into the night. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to reconnect with his daughter. He sent her short voice notes telling her bedtime stories over the phone. At first, she was shy, speaking only a few words. But slowly, she began to open up again. "Are you coming home soon, Daddy?" she asked one night. "Soon, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm working on it. Promise?" "I promise." The next morning, Maya called him, excitement in her voice. "Daniel, I found something." She explained that the original footage file had a backup stored in a cloud system used by the department's IT. With the help of a contact she trusted, she recovered it, and what they saw made Daniel's hands shake. In the unedited version, a different officer, someone from his own department, was seen entering the evidence room after Daniel had already left. The man was holding a duffel bag. His face was clear in one frame, and Daniel recognized him instantly. It was Detective Cole, one of the higher-ranking officers who had handled internal investigations. Daniel's voice was quiet when he spoke. "That's him. He framed me," Maya nodded, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows." But Daniel knew this wouldn't be simple. Going against a man like Cole meant going against power, reputation, and connections. He'd seen what happened to people who spoke up. Still, he couldn't stop now. Too much had been taken from him. His badge, his honor, his family. He needed the truth to come out. That night, Daniel sat by the window of the small apartment looking out at the city lights. The sound of distant traffic filled the air. He thought about everything. The job he loved, the friends who turned away, the daughter who still believed in him. He whispered to himself, "They can take everything from me, but not my truth." The next day, Maya prepared her report. She gathered all the evidence, cross-checked the data, and prepared to publish the story. Daniel knew once it went out, everything would change, for better or worse. Before she left, Maya looked at him and said, "Are you ready for this?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I've been ready since the day they took my badge." As she walked away, Daniel took out Lily's note from his pocket, the one that said, "I know you didn't do it." He smiled softly, holding it close. For the first time in months, he felt like hope was real again. The truth was finally within reach. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The next few days were filled with quiet tension. Daniel barely slept, barely ate. The air in his small apartment felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Every sound outside, a car passing, a phone vibrating, footsteps in the hallway, made him turn his head. He knew the moment the truth came out, it wouldn't just make headlines, it would shake the entire department. Maya had promised to publish the story once she had solid proof. And now, with the recovered footage clearly showing Detective Cole entering the evidence room after Daniel, she had what she needed. Still, both of them knew this was dangerous. Cole wasn't just another officer. He had influence, connections, and people who would protect him. "Once we release this," Maya told Daniel over the phone, "we can't go back." "Are you ready?" Daniel's voice was steady. "I've already lost everything. All that's left is the truth." That night, Maya uploaded the video to her news outlet's servers and began writing the article. It was clear, detailed, and backed by evidence, showing how the security footage had been altered, how files were tampered with, and how Daniel had been made the scapegoat for missing evidence. She didn't sleep. Neither did Daniel. By morning, the story was live. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The headline flashed across news sites shared by thousands online. "Evidence tampering exposed. Detective Cole linked to false accusation against fellow officer." The reaction was immediate. Social media buzzed with outrage and disbelief. People who once called Daniel a criminal were now asking how such injustice could happen. The video clip, showing the unedited footage, was played again and again. There was no denying what it showed. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, watching the chaos unfold. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. After months of silence and shame, people were finally listening. Then the calls started coming. First, his lawyer. "Daniel, it's happening," Adam said, excitement in his voice. "The department has no choice but to reopen your case. They've suspended Cole and launched an internal investigation. You're going to be cleared, I can feel it." Daniel took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "I just want them to tell the truth. That's all." Later that afternoon, Maya came over. She looked tired but proud. "You did it," she said softly. "They're finally seeing who you really are." Daniel shook his head. "No, you did it. You believed me when no one else did." Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes believing is the hardest part." But even in that moment of hope, Daniel knew it wasn't over. He'd been in the system long enough to understand how slowly justice moved, and how easily people in power could twist things. By evening, news crews were parked outside the precinct. Reporters shouted questions as Cole was led out in handcuffs, covering his face from cameras. The image flashed across every screen in the city. It was surreal. Daniel watched from home, frozen. The man who had taken everything from him was now the one being accused. The next morning, the police department held a press conference. The new acting chief stood before a crowd of reporters. "We deeply regret the wrongful actions that led to the suspension and arrest of Officer Daniel Harris," he said. "An internal review has confirmed that evidence was falsified and procedures were violated. Officer Harris has been fully cleared of all charges." The room erupted in noise. Daniel watched the broadcast live, his eyes wet with tears. For months he had lived with humiliation, fear, and doubt. Now the truth had come out, not from lawyers or courts, but from persistence, honesty, and the small circle of people who still believed in him. Still, the reality of it all didn't sink in immediately. When his lawyer called to tell him he could pick up his clearance papers, Daniel just sat there quietly for a few seconds. "Daniel?"
"You there?"
Adam asked. "Yeah," Daniel whispered. "I'm here. I don't even know what to say." "Say you're free," Adam said with a smile in his voice. "Because you are." The next day, Daniel walked back into the precinct for the first time since his suspension. The same halls that once echoed with whispers now felt eerily silent. People looked up as he passed, some ashamed, some smiling softly, others unsure what to say. He stopped at his old locker. It was empty. The nameplate had been removed. He stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the cold metal door. Captain Reed approached quietly. "Daniel," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry." Daniel turned to face him. "You did what you had to do." Reed nodded slowly. "We all failed you. I should have looked deeper." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Reed said, "There's going to be a ceremony next week to officially clear your name. The department wants to make it right." Daniel sighed. "They can't give me back what I lost." Reed nodded again, his eyes filled with regret. "I know, but maybe this is a start." That night, Daniel went to see his daughter. He hadn't been near his old house since the day he was arrested. As he stood outside the gate, he saw Lily in the yard playing with her teddy bear. She looked up and froze. "Daddy?" she said softly. Daniel smiled, tears welling in his eyes. "Hey, sweetheart." She dropped the teddy bear and ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. "You came back." He held her tight, his voice trembling. "I told you I would." Her mother stood by the door, watching quietly. She didn't say much, just nodded, her eyes wet. For the first time, there was understanding in her face instead of doubt. Daniel spent the evening with Lily, listening to her stories, watching her laugh again. She showed him a drawing she'd made, him in his uniform holding her hand. "See," she said proudly. "I told my friends my daddy's a hero. He couldn't hold back his tears anymore." He hugged her again, whispering, "You're the reason I kept fighting." The next morning, he woke up early and sat by the window, sipping coffee for the first time in months, without feeling the weight of guilt. The sun was bright, the air crisp. Life suddenly felt possible again. But even in his relief, he couldn't stop thinking about others. People who might have been in the same situation, people who didn't have journalists or lawyers to fight for them. He had seen enough during his years on the force to know how easy it was for the system to crush someone. Later that day, Maya stopped by again. "You're famous now," she joked. "Your story is everywhere. People are calling it a miracle." Daniel smiled. "It's not a miracle. It's just the truth, finally seen." "You know," she said, "what happened to you could inspire others. Maybe you should speak about it. Help people who've been wrongfully accused." Daniel thought for a moment. "Maybe I will. Not as a cop, though. I don't think I can go back to that life." Maya nodded. "Maybe not. But you can still serve people, just in a different way." That evening, Daniel went for a walk through the park near his old station. People who recognized him nodded respectfully. One older man stopped him and said, "You showed us that not all cops are bad, son. You held your head high. Don't lose that." Daniel thanked him and kept walking, feeling something inside him heal, slowly, but surely. When he got home, Lily was waiting with another drawing. This one showed the two of them standing under a big rainbow with the words, "Together Again," written in big letters at the top. He smiled and said, "You're quite the artist." She grinned. "I draw happy things now, because you're home." As he tucked her into bed that night, she asked softly, "Daddy, what happens now?" He brushed her hair back and smiled. "Now we start over." She smiled sleepily and whispered, "I'm glad you never gave up." Daniel sat there for a while after she fell asleep, watching her breathe peacefully. The world outside was still messy, unfair and unpredictable, but in that small moment everything felt right. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The department might never fully erase the damage done. The headlines would fade eventually, but the truth, the one thing that had carried him through the darkest nights, would always remain. And as long as Lily believed in him, that was enough. The morning air was cool, and a light mist covered the street as Daniel walked toward the old community center. It had been months since his name was cleared, but he still woke up every day feeling like he had something to prove, not to the world anymore, but to himself. People recognized him now. Some stopped him to shake his hand, others just nodded with quiet respect, but there were still a few who looked away, unsure how to treat a man who had been both a cop and an accused criminal. Daniel didn't blame them. The world had changed the way it saw him, and maybe it always would. Inside the community center, a group of teenagers sat in folding chairs waiting for him to begin. They were kids from rough neighborhoods, some with parents in jail, others who had dropped out of school. Daniel had started visiting once a week to talk to them, not as a cop, but as someone who had seen both sides of justice. He smiled and leaned against the table. "All right," he said in a calm voice. "Who wants to tell me what they think justice means?" One boy raised his hand. "It means the bad guys get punished," he said quickly. Another girl shook her head. "No, it means you get what you deserve, and good or bad." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're both right. But sometimes," he said, looking around the room, "justice takes time. Sometimes it's not about punishment. It's about truth." He told them a little about his story, how he'd been blamed for something he didn't do, how he almost lost everything, and how one person believing in him had changed it all. The kids listened closely, some leaning forward, others just staring quietly. When he finished, a small boy in the back raised his hand. "Did you hate the people who did it to you?" Daniel paused. "At first, yes. I was angry, really angry. But hate doesn't fix anything. It just keeps you stuck in the same place. What helped me was forgiving them, not because they deserved it, but because I needed peace." The boy nodded slowly, as if trying to understand. After the session, a few of the kids came up to thank him. One girl said, "You make me feel like it's okay to start over." Daniel smiled gently. "It's always okay to start over." As the weeks went by, word spread about his community work. Local news outlets began covering it, calling him the cop who turned pain into purpose. He didn't like the attention much, but he knew if his story could help even one person believe in second chances, then it was worth it. One afternoon, while he was helping paint the community hall, his phone buzzed. It was Maya. "Daniel, you've got to see this," she said, excitement in her voice. When they met later that day, she showed him an article she'd written for a national publication. It was titled, "From Accused to Advocate: How One Man's Fall Exposed a Broken System." The story was honest, heartfelt, and beautifully written. It talked about what he went through, but more importantly, how he chose compassion over bitterness. "You're inspiring people," Maya said, smiling. "There are hundreds of comments and people saying your story gave them hope." Daniel stared at the screen, speechless. "I never wanted to be famous," he said softly. "You're not," Maya replied. "You're real. That's what people need." In the following weeks, invitations started coming in. Schools, community groups, even local TV shows wanted him to speak. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he ever imagined doing. But Lily encouraged him. "You should tell your story, Daddy," she said one night as they sat together on the couch. "Then people will know that good people can win too." He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "You're wise beyond your years, you know that?" She giggled. "I just know my daddy's brave." That was all the push he needed. His first big talk was at a police training seminar, the same kind of room he used to sit in years ago. Standing there, facing rows of uniformed officers, was strange. Many of them looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to expect. Daniel began simply. "When I joined the force, I believed in the badge," he said. "I believed it stood for truth and honor. But I also learned that it's not the badge that makes someone good. It's the person wearing it. He spoke about accountability, about how easy it was for power to be misused, and how important it was for officers to remember the people behind every case file. He didn't speak with anger, just honesty. By the end, the room was silent, not from discomfort, but from reflection. When he stepped off the stage, several officers came up to shake his hand. One of them, a young recruit, said quietly, "I'll remember what you said, sir. I'll make sure I wear the badge the right way." Later that evening, Daniel drove home feeling lighter. For the first time in years, he felt like he was where he was meant to be. Life wasn't perfect. His marriage hadn't healed. And there were still nights when he woke up from bad dream, but his heart was calmer now. Lily's laughter filled the house again. The walls that once felt heavy with silence were now alive with warmth. One weekend, while they were at the park, a woman approached him with her teenage son. "You're Officer Harris, right?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "Just Daniel now," she smiled. "I wanted to thank you. My son watched your interview online. He was going down the wrong path, but after hearing your story, he decided to go back to school." Daniel looked at the boy who stood quietly beside her. "That's brave," he said kindly. "Keep making the right choices. It's never too late," the boy smiled shyly. "Thanks, sir." As they walked away, Daniel turned to Lily, who was sitting on a swing. "You see that?" he said. "That's why we never give up," she grinned. "Because someone might need your story?" "Exactly." The following month, Daniel was invited to speak at a charity event for wrongfully accused individuals. It was a big gathering. People from all walks of life, from ex-police officers to families who'd lost faith in the system. When he got on stage, he looked out at the crowd and took a deep breath. "I used to think justice was something you could see," he began. "A courtroom, a uniform, a verdict. But I learned that real justice is quieter. It lives in truth, forgiveness, and courage." He told his story again, not to relive the pain, but to show how hope could survive even in the darkest places. People wiped tears as he spoke about Lily, about the day he begged to hug her one last time, and about how that moment gave him the strength to keep fighting. When he finished, the audience stood and clapped. Some came forward to thank him, others just wanted to shake his hand. A few even whispered that his story gave them courage to keep fighting for their own loved ones. That night, as he left the event hall, Maya called him again. "You're becoming a symbol of hope, Daniel," she said warmly. "Do you realize that?" He laughed softly. "I'm just a dad who didn't give up." "You're more than that," she said. "You remind people that the truth can survive, even when everything else breaks." After they hung up, Daniel walked home under the quiet night sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for once he didn't feel small beneath them. He felt whole. When he reached home, Lily was waiting for him, half asleep on the couch. "How was your speech?" she murmured. "It went well," he said softly, sitting beside her. "People listened?" She smiled drowsily. "That's because they can feel your heart." Daniel laughed quietly. "Maybe you're right." He carried her to bed, tucking her in gently. As he turned off the light, he paused for a moment, watching her peaceful face. Everything he had lost, his job, his reputation, his freedom, had led him to this new life, one built not on power but purpose. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, Daniel sat by the window, sipping his coffee. His phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "You might want to check the news." Curious, he turned on the TV. A reporter was standing outside the courthouse saying, "The department has announced a new program today, a mentorship initiative for young officers, inspired by former Officer Daniel Harris's story." He blinked in surprise, a slow smile spreading across his face. Lily ran in, rubbing her eyes. "What's happening, Daddy?" He looked down at her and smiled. "Something good, sweetheart. Something very good." For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like his pain had turned into something beautiful, something that could outlive the hurt. He had lost everything once, but now he had something far more precious, the power to change lives, and that, he thought, was the truest kind of justice. The morning was peaceful, filled with the smell of rain that had fallen through the night. Daniel stood at the window of his small kitchen, watching drops of water slide down the glass. The world outside felt calm, but inside his chest there was a quiet storm, one made of gratitude, memory, and hope. It had been a full year since his name was cleared. The world had moved on, but his story had stayed alive in ways he never expected. People still sent him letters. From strangers, from students, from families who said his courage had helped them hold on to hope. He read every single one of them, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with tears. He folded the last letter neatly and looked over at Lily, who was sitting at the table, finishing her breakfast. Her hair was messy, her cheeks full of toast crumbs, and her eyes were full of that light he loved so much. "Big day today, sweetheart?" he asked. She nodded. "It's the school open day." "You said you'd come," he smiled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." After everything they'd been through, Daniel tried never to miss anything that mattered to her. Every recital, every drawing she brought home, every bedtime story. He had lost enough time already. He wouldn't lose another moment. When they reached her school, parents were scattered around the playground talking and laughing. Some recognized him, the man who had once been the face of a scandal, now the symbol of redemption. They nodded politely, some even smiled. It no longer made him uncomfortable. He'd learned that people's opinions didn't define his worth. Inside the classroom, Lily ran off to show her drawings. Daniel watched her proudly as she explained her art to her teacher. There was one picture that caught his eye. It showed a man and a little girl standing in front of a big sun. The man had tears in his eyes and the girl was holding his hand. Underneath it, she had written, "My daddy came back." Daniel swallowed hard. He felt his throat tighten, but he smiled anyway. That evening, as they walked home, Lily held his hand tightly. "Daddy," she said softly, "do you ever think about what happened before?" He nodded. "Sometimes, but not as much as I used to." "Do you forgive them?" she asked. He looked down at her. "I do," he said after a pause. "Because if I don't forgive, I'll keep living in the past. And I don't want to miss our future." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm glad you came back to me." Daniel's heart warmed. "I promised I would, didn't I?" That night, after putting her to bed, Daniel received a call from the mayor's office. They were organizing a special community award ceremony, and they wanted to honor him for his service and his work with youth programs. He hesitated at first. Public attention still made him uneasy. But then he thought about what Lily had said. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for every person who had ever been broken and rebuilt. The ceremony was held a week later in the city hall. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras clicking. Daniel stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment. He wasn't nervous, just reflective. When his name was called, the audience clapped warmly. He walked to the podium, the lights bright on his face, and paused for a moment before speaking. "I used to wear a uniform," he began. "I thought it made me strong. But I learned that true strength doesn't come from badges or titles. It comes from getting back up when life knocks you down." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people from all walks of life. "I was once accused of something I didn't do. I lost my job, my freedom, and almost my faith in people. But I never lost my hope, because of one small hand that held on to mine when the world turned its back." He smiled gently, glancing toward the front row, where Lily sat beaming. "That hand reminded me that love is stronger than any lie." The audience fell silent, moved by his words. "Today," he continued, "I stand here not as a police officer, not as a victim, but as a father, a believer, and a man who learned that truth always finds a way." Applause filled the hall. Some people stood. Others wiped away tears. Daniel accepted the award quietly, his heart full but steady. He wasn't seeking glory. He just wanted to remind people that pain could lead to purpose. After the ceremony, people came up to congratulate him. Maya was among them, smiling proudly. "You did it, Daniel," she said. "You turned your story into something that matters." He shook his head gently. "We did it. You helped me find the truth." Maya laughed softly. "I just wrote the story. You lived it." As he stepped outside, flashes from cameras filled the night air. But something else caught his attention. A familiar face standing across the street. It was one of the senior officers who had once believed he was guilty. The man looked nervous, holding his cap in his hands. Daniel walked toward him. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said calmly. The officer nodded, his voice low. "I came to say I'm sorry. I should have seen the truth sooner." Daniel studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "It's all right. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." The man shook his hand, relief flooding his face. "You're a better man than I'll ever be." "No," Daniel said quietly. "Just a man who learned the hard way." As he turned to leave, Lily came running toward him, her dress fluttering in the evening breeze. "Daddy, everyone's talking about your speech," she said, laughing. Daniel lifted her up, spinning her gently. "Oh yeah? What are they saying?" "That you made them cry," she said proudly. He chuckled. "Well, that wasn't my plan. Can we go get ice cream?" she asked, grinning. "Always," he said. They walked together under the city lights, the air cool and peaceful. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Just a father and daughter walking side by side, finally free from shadows. The next morning, a photo of him hugging Lily at the ceremony spread across social media. It showed him kneeling as she threw her arms around his neck, both smiling through tears. The caption read, "The hug that healed more than a heart." Within hours, it went viral. People shared it with words like hope, forgiveness, and faith in humanity restored. Daniel didn't even know about it until a friend called. "You're everywhere, man," the friend said. "That picture, it's powerful." Daniel opened his laptop, saw the image, and stared at it for a long moment. It was the same kind of hug he'd begged for years ago, the one he thought might be his last. But now it wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. Later that week, he was invited to appear on a national talk show. The host greeted him warmly and said, "Your story has touched millions. That photo of you and your daughter has become a symbol of hope. How does it feel?" Daniel smiled thoughtfully. "It feels like life gave me back what it took away. That hug reminded me that no matter how dark things get, love can still find you." The audience clapped softly. The host leaned forward. "What do you hope people take from your story?" He looked directly into the camera. "That no one is defined by the worst day of their life. And that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's how we heal." That line was replayed on countless news clips, quoted in articles, and shared on social media. But Daniel didn't care about the fame. All he cared about was the quiet peace that now filled his days. He continued working at the community center, mentoring young people and visiting schools. Sometimes, when he'd finished speaking, a student would come up and hug him. Every time he'd think of Lily, of that first hug in the courtroom and the second one that changed the world. Years later, when Lily was older, she found that same viral photo framed in his office. "You still keep this?" she asked, smiling. "Always," he said. "It reminds me that hope can rise from anything." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," he smiled softly. "I'm proud of us, sweetheart." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in warm gold. The world had moved on, but Daniel's heart had found its place again. Not in the past, not in the pain, but in the love that never gave up. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and took Lily's hand. Together they walked home, their shadows stretching long on the pavement. Two souls who had once been broken, now whole again, and somewhere deep in his heart, Daniel whispered the same promise he once made years ago. "I'll always come back to you." Because in the end, that hug, the one he thought would be his last, became the beginning of everything.